Okay, so we'll start out with a little beginning. This is Dr. Chris Lemmon of Wizard's Catch blog site, just throwing out some ideas and recording this. You get a little pixelation because of the background, because the water scene in the background is much prettier than my garage, and I'm sitting in the garage, so this is an illusion. I've been pretty much an illusion all my life, so I'm used to it. But anyway, if it looks a little weird to you, don't worry about it. I'm not beaming down from some cloud operation. It's just talking to you from my garage. Okay. And the idea I'm talking about is something that I call a life stream. And it's just a term that I badger around. Change always seems to be, the vision of change always seems to be fairly easy, but it's not so easy. And even though you tell people it's not easy, statistically, but barely 1% of people can enact change that they need for medical reasons. So it's pretty scary. But why does it seem so easy? So we're not talking today about how to do that. That's kind of a lifetime's work. But really talking about the terminology and kind of where it came from and why it's so convoluted and confusing. So I think let's start with the idea that we're really a tribal community. We're tribal based, we humans. If you actually go back to the Cain and Abel story, you know, it's kind of like the first humans, but Cain and Abel got into a fight and one killed the other. And really, if they were doing any fighting, it was probably over the sister, right? Because if there wasn't a sister, there would be no human race. And that becomes the issue with tribal people in the very beginning, was pretty much fighting over whose gene pool is going to supply the propagation of humans. And that seems to be the conflict also with animals. So we were really just a tribal group. Tribals were pretty much somewhere like just a big family, maybe with brothers and sisters and grandparents, on an average around 20 people. More than that, there was conflict. They didn't necessarily always kill each other, but they would separate. So that's kind of the root of us. So when you start to look at it from that perspective, a child being born would get instructions from the family of what their role was in a family, right? And how that operates. And that's a cultural piece. So beginning, it was a tribal piece. Eventually the tribes over time, thousands of years, got to be bigger and bigger and bigger. And then they eventually became cultural pieces, right? What we're headed for in an evolutionary piece is to get to a global state. So let me explain that before we go on. When we started out with small tribes, there was a pretty good sized gap between you and someone else. Family would explain why your brother and sister were different than you, why someone's role was different than someone else's role, why responsibility was different. We've all gone through that in our culture. We just came through Thanksgiving, and it's like there's only a handful of countries in the world that, of course, celebrate that. I can't even understand why some of them celebrate it out there, other than the United States, because it's kind of a U.S. thing. And maybe with the American Indians, but, you know, we pretty much pushed them into a corner somewhere. So I just find that whole thing interesting, is that so many cultures have so many different pieces and so many different ideas. I think that the children are born with a receptivity, and that's coming not just from my studies, but also an awful lot from science. It seems that we're receptive. So it doesn't come, if you look at Noam Chomsky's material, the ability to learn language, the ability to interface, the ability to pick up things. We don't learn all of that data. We almost have a resource somewhere. I don't know where it's at, maybe somewhere in a cloud operation, right? But that resource operation starts to flow in to us, and we can then make sense out of it. Kids learn on an average of what? A new word every 90 minutes during that prime time until the early teens. So the ability to, when we learn a word, it's not that we learn to say the word, but you get to learn to use it in a sentence. That's full use of a word. So learning curve is absolutely amazing. So this develops, and there used to be a pretty good sized gap in your role within a community. And then pretty soon there was a big size gap between your definition of your culture and other cultures. As we move towards a global community, those gaps have got to narrow down. so that we can integrate. As those gaps narrow down, the barrier between all those starts to go away, whether it's a racial barrier based on color, based on religion, based on the size of your eyes, lots of different customs, so on and so forth. Those will all start to diminish. We're already having problems with facial recognition because too much data, right? So we look at a picture and it looks too much like so many different people. We get a picture of a bank robber and facial recognition will pick up 11,275 people that it could be. So it's actually making research even more challenging, right? And it's even more of a challenge for people in ethnic groups, because then the people that are distinguishing it don't always pick out the data information. So I would say probably within 1,000 years, some tool like that, we're going to all look much closer. Our customs are going to be much closer together. As those barriers just diminish between us and they diminish and get down to almost nothing, we're not only going to look much closer together, but we're going to act much closer together. Diversity is going to be much closer. And this is part of the problem we're already getting with this virus, is that the barriers between us and a concept that worked out really good for bats doesn't work out so good when it gets into our matrix. So it was a balancing component for bats, and now it gets into our world. And this is going to actually continue. I think we're going to see more and more of this. Will a solution come for this? I think so. But usually the problems come before the solutions. Isn't that the case? Most of the time we sit around and the world's fine, and then we have a problem, and then we look for a solution. So that's the case of us developing. And so as we see, so I call those pieces that you develop in life as a life stream. It's intended to be you. To define that life stream, it's not just a story in your head. I know that's a wonderful thing, like change your story, change your life, but it really doesn't work that way. That story not only includes the background. If you look at Heidegger's material, the background is in there and it integrates to the background, but it also integrates totally into the biology. And that's what we don't get. We're looking at it for ideas in the head, the story pieces, the rationale, and that really doesn't take up much of the real estate. A lot of the biology comes in. The biology, I think that we know that the biology gets data, from chemistry, right? Through hormones to your blood, it puts signals out. We know it gets it through nervous systems. There's data that's coming in. We know but someone's got their mic on. Would you mute your mic?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Hello?
The only thing I needed was in the back.
All right. Somebody's unconscious. So
It's Brian.
it's
Brian Dibby and Ron and Marilyn are not muted either.
Okay. Okay. I got it. Thank you. All right. I got them all. All right. So the biology gets involved too. And it's just not a signal, a simple signal, one data. Like we're in an ion stream right now with this visual piece, right? So it's transferred to the ionosphere. But the data that our life stream comes in a multitude of things. It comes together. It's a very, very complex stream. When I look at biology, I think what I'm in favor of right now is that biological pieces, the cells divide. And when they divide, they get on them. Those forms tubulars on there. Those tubulars are identical in size for a certain style of cell. And I think that that symmetry in there produces a resonance. And I think a lot of data gets communicated through the resonance. So there's a lot of new ideas out there that are just coming into vogue. And it's going to be quite a while till we find some way we can manage all that. Right now, we're trying to do a lot of healing work and management with chemistry, just because of the fact that they have research and funding, right? The pharmaceutical industry is large. The resources of money is profound. So they can dig into and do a lot of that. But I think that there's a lot of other ideas. Our ability to be influenced is extremely high. Let me give you a story. And this is an old story, and it's usually referred to as the boy in the rope. And way back when we started doing movies, that's a long time ago, we used to have our projectors that hand cranked. And there was a guy in Hollywood that made a couple of those old silent movies that were hand cranked, and they were black and white, and the movements were real jerky. And so he had made a few movies, made some money, and decided he was inspired by a story from India. And there was a story in India about this man who was phenomenal, putting on this show. Thousands and thousands of people were going to see it. So this guy, because he made a few dollars, got together his camera crew and went to India. And here thousands of people were gathering in front of a stage in a center of a little city. And the guy was going to come out and do his show. So they had set up in the way in the back, they'd set up their camera sub up on a rooftop or somewhere so they could run the projector. And what the show went was like this. There's a little brown man that walks out on stage with a flute and a basket. And he sits the basket down and he takes off the lid and he starts to play his flute. And pretty soon a snake starts to come up out of the basket. Now that's typical everywhere in India. You see those on street corners, right? So far it's just a cultural piece. And then all of a sudden the snake turns into a rope. The rope goes up in the air and it gets up and it almost disappears. Not because it goes miles up, because it like goes into clouds or something. It just becomes invisible. And he's playing that. And as he's playing that, pretty soon you see a small boy start to crawl up from the basket, hand over hand. He's climbing up the rope. And he's climbing up the rope and he's climbing up the rope. And pretty soon he disappears. And then the guy puts down his flute, reaches in a basket, pulls out a sword, gets the sword in his teeth, climbs up the rope, and he disappears. And then in a few seconds, you see the rope shake, and then pieces of the boy hacked off, arms, legs, so on and so forth, start falling down into the basket. Pleasant show. And then the guy climbs down, throws his knife into the basket, picks up his flute, starts to play it again, and the rope starts to wind its way down. As the rope winds its way down, why then it becomes a snake. And as it moves down farther, then he puts the basket on it, picks up his basket, bows. Of course, people are throwing money and flowers and food and everything up on stage, and then he walks off. So this guy captured this show and he's all excited about it. So they take the camera and they come back to the United States and they go through the process of taking that and getting the film into a movie that they can project, right? Because they've got to develop it. And once they get it developed, he gets his whole staff together at the studio to see this. And when they play the film, what they see is a stage, thousands of people around, and a little brown man walking out with a flute. There's no basket, there's no rope, there's no snake, and there's no kid. And so this guy just plays his flute, moves his arms around on stage. We're very, very easy to influence. Makes you wonder about some of Houdini's tricks with elephants dancing on stage, right? Just kind of amazing. Obviously, the little guy continued to do his little sideshow, but he didn't have thousands of people anymore, so pretty soon he came out of favor. But it was very interesting to see our ability to be influenced gives us the illusion that it's easy to change, gives us the illusion that it's easy to accept things. We can imagine them a certain way, and we can accept them. That's very, very simple. But changing this mass is not so simple. It doesn't just work in that perspective usually. We can get headed in the right direction, but it takes a little bit of time. We don't have a very good guidance system yet. We're developing it. And there's always a battle between the world of phenomena, that's the world of things happen that aren't always logical. And that's a nice guiding piece. But then the logical world doesn't like the phenomena world, right? Because it can't put labels on it. So finding a balance between those two is a challenge. And that's what you guys are learning in classes. And that's what we're starting to teach. Where can this go adrift? Well, let me give you some examples. The first that I see is say you start out in life as a young person and maybe you get a relationship or a job and maybe it doesn't work out real good. And it's a really big struggle. and you're trying to make it work because you're good people, but it's just not working. The job's not working, the relationship's not working. So whatever you decide, we're going to change. So you go a different direction. You either get a different relationship or a different job, some change occurs, and then it starts to work out. 25 years later, you retire. Okay, or your partner dies or something. There's a change. And when that change occurs, you're able to be done with the product that you refined and finished. Let's just say job. You were able to be successful at the job, you retired, you made money, you're retired, you're living on your 401k. Everything is going fine. But now you're getting sick. And you wonder, why am I getting sick? I've always been a healthy person. All that struggle, way back there, all that struggle is still real. It's just that your success has overshadowed it. It was always in the background of your subconscious running. When you close that program and are done with it, the other program's still running and it comes to the forefront. And now you're sitting in something that's way past because you didn't secure that with a marker. It seems to be that our references, our ranges are able to be stored and built in a multitude of ways. And the old way was a dichotomy with a range in the center. One direction was good and one was bad, right? There's the old stories of like, move to the good, stay away from the bad. That's one way to do a range. Another way to do a range is to have a fixed point and it moves there in a direction of improvement. At some point, because of evolution, I told you those gaps get smaller. At some point, it just means there'll be a split, a bifurcation. And that range will get to a point and it'll split into two. So that's the end point. So you've got a secure point to where it splits. And if that becomes your range, then when you put more energy into it, it moves towards the end point, towards the goal of being able to come to more choices. If you've got the old style range or you put more energy into it, it either moves in the direction of good or moves in the direction of bad. And it's very, very confusing because in the circular spirit, it comes back to meeting each other and just creating confusion. At some point in time, whether you're good all your life and it doesn't seem to pay off sometimes, or you've been a criminal and then sometimes you seem to get away with it, it's because these things circle around. It's not a very good system. Much, much better having secure points. To have secure points, we have to be able to get used to securing things in life. You have to be able to move into something and be done with it. I started a talk earlier before we recording started saying that I had actually quit celebrating Thanksgiving. Not because there's anything wrong with it, but I just got to a point where I was excited as a family, cultural thing. I was involved in it. When I didn't like the way it was unfolding for family and culture, it was no longer supportive. I pulled my energy out of it and I said, I'm done. So I never was available. I never responded. I'm done. So I secured that point. I didn't want to have to deal with it later in life. So I've learned a long time in life to, when you're finished with something, to just secure it. You're done. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to all work out. Maybe you just need to walk away from it. There are a lot of things that I've attempted that didn't work out. So I just walked away from it. I said, I'm done. When I say walk away from it, I don't mean let it irritate you for the next 20 years. I mean, be done with it. Done means it never comes into your mind anymore. Never. Gone. Gone. So those are start to be fixed points. When we start to look at wellness, you have issues or struggles in your life and you made some changes and you completed some steps and you think, well, that's pretty good. I finally accomplished this. I finally got my degree. I finally made more money. I finally, whatever. For you, that's maybe a done piece and you can secure that. But now your range starts with influences that were buried way back. They didn't have enough energy to show up in consciousness, but now they take the whole range. And now we have a dysfunction that we don't have a relationship with because it's too old. Or because it's someone else's path. Or let me give you two stories. I had a guy come in to see me one time and he had rheumatoid arthritis and he was pretty well crippled up with it. And this was his story. He came in and he said that he had an older brother and an older sister. and of course parents. And he was Middle Eastern, I think. And he said his dad was a real jerk. Now, he was just culturally very authoritative. His word was a word of law in the family. Okay, not very American today, even still not even all that American then. The oldest son finished college, and when he finished college, he told Dad, I don't want any part of your business. I actually don't want to ever see you again. I'm out of here. And he left, never made contact with family again, never called his brother, never had anything to do with family. Gone completely. The sister, when she finished school, she married someone, and she told her father she never wants any communication with him. I actually hate you, and I don't want to hear from you ever again. Occasionally, she would call her mother when Dad was at work. And Dad had a very successful business. It was lucrative. He had money. So the youngest brother, he went to college and decided he wanted to be a musician. Well, that wasn't the wisest of choices in a market as far as being able to produce income. So there he was out there struggling in the world somewhere, trying to make a living as a musician and not doing very well. And his dad finally, because his other two kids had left him, I think he finally got the message, and probably his wife had been probably picking on him too for a while. So he actually sought out this youngest son, and he said, maybe I haven't done things right, but I'm successful at what I do. That's why I think what I'm doing is right, because of my success. So he said, I'm willing to give a little bit. You need help because you aren't going to ever make it out here. You're renting someone's couch to sleep on. I mean, you barely have food to eat. So he said, come to my company. Let me train you. 5 years, I'll have you trained. I'm going to retire. You can have the business and do what you want with it. You can sell it. You can do whatever you want. I don't care. It's just like my last stab of making a connection. So the guy said, okay, Dad, sounds like a plan. I will come learn. Immediately, the young man got rheumatoid arthritis, pretty much crippled up. Every day for the next 2 years, he was in pain every day. He went to doctors, he went to specialists. He was on pain meds, which is no fun. Constantly struggling with his pain and working at the job and learning the occupation, his job. And then he showed up at my door. And so we talked a little bit. And I explained to him that he abandoned his musical career with his vision that he'd go back to it sometime, blah, 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 blah. I don't think he should go back to it. I think he should end it. And then I think he should start it again. He should have a completed end, be done, and have another start. Come back in as new, novel. Like Cat Stevens, abandoned everything and then came back later, for example, right? So that's what I suggested to him. So we sat down and we did some energy work, and we were done with his musical career and his vision. We just were completely done. We had agreed that we could create something else when he had money in the bank. Maybe he sold the company in 5 years or whatever. That was available to him. That was a choice that he would deal with then. He's done. What happened to him is that for the next 3 days, unbeknown to me, he completely was out of pain. I met him on a Saturday night. His deal was on Saturdays and Sundays, he took no pain pills. So when he originally called me, he said he'd come, but he didn't know how long he could stay because he was in a lot of pain. He might have to go home. And if he gets really a lot of pain, he can't drive. So he has to leave before it's too late. So we did this session on a Saturday night. Sunday, he was in no pain at all. Monday, he went to work, and it was like amazing because he had no pain. So he got caught up on all his back paperwork. He did all these things around the office that were kind of spectacular. Tuesday, he did really good. Wednesday morning, he got up and he had a little pain in his body. And I taught him a trick. I had him take his pain pills and put them in his pocket, not take them in his body, get them in his field. Yes, they don't work as well, but they at least transfer the message to you. And if you're not in a huge lot of pain, it may be sufficient to get you by. So he actually, Wednesday morning, he showed up at work and his dad called for him. So he went to his dad's office and his dad said, I've been watching you Monday and Tuesday of this week, and I can't believe it. I had decided to sell the company and just give you the money and retire. That was my decision I had made because you were struggling and you weren't happy and you weren't accomplishing things. And I was repeating myself, and I realized that I was failing to instruct you very well. You just weren't getting what I was saying. And then this Monday and Tuesday, I saw you and it's like, oh my gosh, this is totally changed. So what I've decided to do, I'm going to leave the office for a year. I'm going to be gone for a year. There's another whole division in my company that you don't know about, that you haven't been trained in yet. I'm going to go away. You won't see me, and I'm going to take care of that for a year. When the year is up and you've got this all down the way you want it, then I'll get together with you and I'll show you the other part. As soon as you're comfortable with that part, I'm going to retire. So now for a year, your mother and I are going to travel and I'll take care of the other part, the purchasing end of it. And as soon as you're got yours under control, so it's like, holy cow, this is an amazing turnaround. I got a call from him on Wednesday night and he was all excited. And he said that he made it through the day. He was still in some pain, but every day he's going to put a pillow in his pocket in the morning and not take pills unless he has to. With his father out of the office, he felt it was a chance. He told me, he said, I'd like to come back to see you, but I've decided that I have this challenge to learn the other end of the business. Maybe it's put off for a year, but I'm going to have to do that. So I don't want to see you again until I finish that. And when I've completed that part of it, then I'm going to come see you again. Up until then, I'll just deal with the pain. I go, wow, that's kind of interesting. Of course, how are you ever going to get hold of me? I'm not easy to get hold of, right? So I've never heard from him again. But just securing at one point, even though it didn't end the relationship, he still had a threat out there that he was facing, right? He was going to have to go face the lions eventually. Now it's intimidating, but nonetheless, that reduced his pain to what, maybe 20%, 30%. I think if we probably could have worked together, we could have found some methodology to eliminate it altogether, but hey, it's his call. So that's what he decided to do. It's just not easy. I'm telling you, it was easy to change. And I'm telling you also, it was not easy to change. He couldn't get the idea that he could abandon all of that. He couldn't. He only got the idea that he was successful in what he felt so far. He couldn't entertain anything bigger. And he realized he had to sit with it for a year before he could entertain something bigger. I'll give you one with a little more success in it. I had a woman call me one time, and she got referred to me by a girlfriend of hers. She was in the Marine Corps, and so was her husband. So they're at Camp Pendleton. And she said her husband's been plagued with a nightmare dream. And he can't go to the medical and complain or get help because it goes in his Marine Corps record, right? So he was trying to find something to do. And he's talked to a few doctors that he could go pay cash for. They couldn't find anything physically wrong with him to create the dream. So I said, okay, I'll come to your house. So I went to their house, and they were like, I mean, they had pictures on the wall of tanks, and they had hand grenades sitting around it, and gun cases sitting there, and trophies on the wall where they've got black belts and karate and stuff. I mean, they were just all military, and they were, the Green Marine t-shirts and the baggy pants and the combat boots, both of them were Marines from the Corps. So I was sitting there thinking, wow, this is a trip. And I'm talking to him, and he says, yeah, every night he has this dream. Not every night, but about 5 nights a week. And he wakes up just soaking wet, and he can't get back to sleep. And it's fatiguing him. And it's been going on for several months. And the dream is really simple. It's like he's in a patrol somewhere, military situation, and he's ambushed. And so his whole patrol are running for cover. And the only thing in cover is there was a river. So they're running to jump in this river to get out of a gunfire. And as they're running towards this river, he looks around and he sees the other members of his patrol getting shot and getting killed as he's running for the river. And he's really just running all out, and he's hoping to make it to the river and hoping that works and he can get out of the gunfire. And that's where the dream ends. And then he wakes up and it goes over and over again. Oh, I'm listening to this, as I'm listening to it, and I'm looking at him, and all of what he just told me is not in him, right? It's outside somewhere. It's a cloud operation. It's outside somewhere. I can see all of that stuff flowed into him. He wasn't searching in here to find it. He was searching outside to find it. It was an external process. You can feel them looking around, their eyes track back and forth like this. He's searching for the content. It's not inside. So I'm going, okay, I know this is going to be a little weird to you guys. I mean, he was a little weird to me, so I knew what I was going to say had to be weird to him. So I said, let's go in your bedroom, because I'm looking at your apartment. This has got to be like, I don't know, 300-400 units in this complex next to the military base. It's just like 4 stories tall, all sandwiched together. I'm looking at your apartment, and it's pretty much a rectangle, and you have shared walls on 3 sides. The door and the window in the front is your only unshared wall that faces the parking lot. All the rest of the walls have got to have people on the other side of the wall, right? So let's go in your bedroom. So we go in the bedroom, I stand in the middle, and I'm showing him, right? And I'm saying, now this is just really simple. It's an intuitive answer that I'm getting to have a demonstration of body. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask a question. I'm going to stand in the center, and I'm going to say, if it's yes, have my body influence me? I have a little push forward. If it's no, I have a little push back. It's just a setup. It's not an automatic thing. It's just a setup, right? It's so that I can get the response into a feeling rather than a response into a story, right? That's all. So he's looking at me, he says, okay, I get that, because he's done training, so he understands, right? So I'm looking and I said, okay, that's north. So I say, is the influence of this dream coming from the north side of the room? And I get a no. I said, okay, is it coming from the south side of the room? And I get a no. I said, well, I don't think it comes from this west side because it's a parking lot, but I can ask, and I got a no. So I said, can it come from this side? And I got a less. A matter of fact, the yes was so strong it almost fell on his bed, standing there in the middle of the room. I was like, oh, wow. So I told him a technique to be done with the day, close things off. So when he goes into dream space, he's not open to all this influence. Little technique, right? And then I left. That was it. 2 weeks later, I got a phone call from his wife. I'm thinking, oh my God, it's worse. No, it wasn't worse. She got her on the phone and she says, I said, hey, how's he doing? And she said, oh, that worked so amazing. He did it that first night thinking, oh, this is nuts, the crazy old guy. But he did it because he was desperate. And he woke up in the morning and it worked. So he tried it the second time with a little more enthusiasm. After the 3rd day, he was sold. I mean, now it hits his personal, not only is his personal ritual, now it's his story he shares with everybody. It's like, this is your miracle. You're the miracle man. I said, okay, that's great. She says, okay, but I'm calling you because he sat down and figured out in this huge complex which apartment would be behind him and who would be sharing that back wall. So in full uniform, he goes around on the other side of the building, figures this all out because that's the way he is, knocked on a guy's door. And you could hear somebody moving in there. They weren't answering very quick. So he kind of stood there and beat on the door until they answered, being a Marine. And the guy answered. The guy was in a green shirt. He was military, obviously. It was all military complex anyway. And the guy had the door just open a crack and he was kind of nervous. So the guy had worked on, he said, you don't know me. I'm, so-and-so, gave his title. And he said, I'm a Marine, obviously. And he said, I live on the other side of your apartment. We share the wall. And I guess I'm here to tell you that I have this repeated dream that's been kind of driving me nuts. And this guy that's peeking out through the doorway, he says, Oh, his door opens a little more. He said, I go totally crazy with a repeated dream. And he said, yeah, I'm being treated for it. So he said, oh, wow. He said, what's your dream about? It's the same dream. Exactly. Only this guy had never been on a patrol or a fire situation, but had been sent overseas. And he was somewhere at a base overseas somewhere, and was sitting around with a bunch of Marines, getting drunk, doing drugs. And somebody was telling stories. An old timer was telling stories. That was the story the old timer was telling. Old timer, I mean, maybe 5 years older. That was the story he was telling, right? And that stuck in his kid's head. And every night he'd have this dream. So they had to actually send him home. He was at Pendleton to be retrained in a different position, or he would get a medical discharge. Because with all the doctor's help, they couldn't get that dream out of his head. Not even a real story, just an influence. Just kind of so intense. So my my Marine client was so delighted. And, you know, I became the hero of the rodeo for a little while. I got a few calls from Marines. So it was really kind of interesting. So that's the nature of life streams. They can twist us and turn us. They can mess us all up. There are events that occurred that aren't active in our life right now. If they were active in our life right now, we would see it. They beat us up, so we weaken, right? We're fighting an enemy we can't see. We're struggling against something that we don't have the nature or the power to do. And that's what I call life stream. If you can secure those pieces, lock them up and be done with them, secure them. And you know you're done with them when they don't come into your mind. You reflect back on it and they're just gone. It's like, wow. Gone means like when I'm gone with someone, they don't ever contact me. They don't ever email me. We just totally separate out as if I don't exist in their world and they don't exist in my world, right? And that's the nature of done, all right? And it's the power in that piece, all right? So those are important markers. They totally change the way you process life and ranges. They totally change the way that you can put energy in life and have it always be beneficial, always move you in a direction of decision-making rather than in a struggle to figure out whether you did it right or wrong. Does that make sense? All right.